Okay, I think we should let's start. Okay, good evening. So we are. I gave a title to this share, which might seem a bit enigmatic, a bit strange. Futuristic vision. I think that I'm going to share with you. What I'm going to try to do is share with you some ideas that are, from the parsha that are basically a sense of how the what transpires in the life of Avraham Avinu and Avraham Avinu's reactions to them, as we'll see, are a vision into the future. And I thought that was just appropriate for the beginning of the parsha, of course. Vayera elov Hashem. Hashem appears to Avraham Avinu. The parsha begins with that notion of the appearance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Avraham Avinu, to, as we know, Rashi says, Levakar Sachola, to visit him after the Bris Milah, and then, of course, the three Malachim. What's striking, and this is something which you can easily miss unless you know what you're looking for, in a way, which I don't, but the Kli Yakar does, is the fact that it says Vayera elov Hashem, right? Why does it say Vayera elov Hashem? Vayera elov Hashem, yeah, it would you would assume that it would say, as it does many other times, Vayera Hashem el Avraham, right? Vayera Hashem el Avraham. Hashem appeared to Avraham. Why does it say Vayera elov Hashem? Hashem appeared to him. It seems like it seems like an unusual way to begin. There seems to be, in some sense, almost like a minimalizing of the presence of Avraham here. Vayera elov Hashem appeared to him. So Kli Yakar gives two different explanations, both of which I think have a really, really fascinating message for us. It's the first Kli Yakar on the parsha. If you're following inside, it says Lo Nema. The Kli Yakar says Vayera Hashem el Avraham. It doesn't say Hashem appeared to Avraham because because the name and the essence of Avraham Avinu were the two opposites. Kishmai Avraham, the name Avraham, his name, Al Shem Av Hamoin Goyim, which we know Avraham means the father of many nations. Moira al Hasrara Vahisnasus. What does that mean? Well, he's the father of many nations. He's Avraham. He's right up there at the pinnacle of humanity. He is a leader. He is a king almost. But on the opposite side, his essence, Hayanov Mikol, he was more humble than anyone else. What did he say? I'm dust and ashes. That's how he describes himself. Right? There's nothing to me. So he says the Kli Yakar like this. You know why the Torah someone who's got that status, because they have that status, mitzad gedulosom, because of their greatness. Al kain therefore le'oma vayera Hashem el Avraham. That's why it doesn't say vayera Hashem el Avraham. Hashem didn't appear to him because he was the father of many nations. Ki mitzad muhus atzmusa. You know why Hashem appeared to him? Elov, him, because of himself, his own nature, his own personality, the fact that he was. The very fact that he was humble, the very fact that he had that ability to recognize that he was only offer va'efer, dust and ashes, despite everything Hashem is saying, I've got in store for you, despite the fact that he's put at the pinnacle of humanity in this way. And that is why it says Hashem appeared to him. And he brings the Gemara in Shabbos, the idea that Hashem rests the Shechina on someone who is an honor, someone who is humble. And that's why it says that here. That's the first pshat, the Kli Yakar. Beautiful, beautiful pshat. The idea that it's to him. You might think now Hashem is appearing to him because I've just named him Avraham. No, it's him. It's because of what he really is, because of the humility of his personality. Then he says something else. Another explanation. He says, you can say another opposite. Why did Hashem appear to Avraham at the beginning? So we know this from other places, and we discussed in the past, the fundamental distinction between Noach and Avraham, one of the fundamental distinctions, of course, is that Avraham has this quality that he can bring others on board. Noach can't bring any others on board ship, literally, right? Whereas Avraham Avinu begins his career as a nefesh asher asu b'choran. He's able to bring people in. So the idea, says the Kli Yakar, is like this. At the beginning, Hashem appears to him because he is Av La'arom. He's able to look at a people like Aram and bring them under the wings of the divine presence, under the Kanfei Shechina, right? He's able to be Mekarev them, even before he becomes Avraham, the Av Hamon Goyim. And because he was the father for them, Hashem appears to him. But in terms of himself, his own personality, he wasn't yet fitting to see to have the Shekhinah appear to him. Why? He was an oral. He was uncircumcised. He had that blemish, that deficiency, right? That deficiency. We know when Avraham Avinu is informed, end of last week's parsha, that he has not had a bris. When he realizes what it means, he falls on his face. It's something which he's lacking. And because of the fact that he has now had a bris milah, it says now, Vayera elov Hashem. Hashem appears to him. Previously, Hashem appeared to him because of his achievements, the fact that he had achieved things specifically in what we will call nowadays kiruv, because he brought others in. He brought people closer to Hashem. Therefore, in that schus, Hashem had appeared to him, despite him not yet having had a bris milah. Now, Vayera elov Hashem. Now, in and of himself, Hashem appears to him because of the merits that he himself has. Okay. Now, why do I think particularly what strikes me about this particular kliyakar? Because these are two different ways of looking at the first three words in the parsha. But I think both of them are critically important. Both of them contain, like I said, this futuristic idea, this vision for the future, because they teach two critical things. Number one, in life, you cannot rely on status in terms of your approach to Torah mitzvahs, to Yiddishkeit, to ruchnis, to growth in what really counts in life. It's not about where you are in terms of the social hierarchy that we all imagine within us, right? Even Avraham Avinu, who is put at that pinnacle by Hashem himself, Hashem reminds him, that's not why I'm appearing to you. I'm appearing to you because of what you've achieved personally, because you're able to still remain elov, him, humility in and of yourself, and realize your position. Everything depends on our personal achievements. It doesn't depend on status. That's the first shut of the kliyakar, the fact that it doesn't say he prayed to Avraham appears to him. And the second one is another message, different message, but equally as important. Sometimes a person can think in life that everything is dependent on what we do in terms of bringing others closer to Yiddishkeit. And that is massively important. It's hugely important to inspire someone else to do Torah mitzvahs. It's an incredible thing. But the second explanation of the kliyakar reminds us that we must never forget that we also have a responsibility, ultimately, to work on ourselves, right, as well, and not to rely on that merit alone. Because the second explanation of the kliyakar is, originally, Hashem, I appeared to you because of that merit, that schus, that you were brought others close. Now, Vayera elov Hashem, now, because you've had a bris milah, I can appear to you in terms of your own merit. We must never forget those two sides, that it's not that's hugely important, but at the same time, we have to understand that working on our own spiritual achievements, making sure that we can achieve what we need to achieve in life ourselves personally, in tandem and often inspired by inspiring others. It's all part of the same thing, but that piece we must remember that piece as well. I think those are the two messages from the kliyakar. If you look at Perek Yud Ches, to move on to still in Perek Yud Ches, Posuk Tes Vav, so we have one of the strangest and most unusual dialogues in the whole Torah, and it's something which I saw a pshat from the Chofetz Chaim, which he delivered in a I don't know whether he delivered it or it was written in a maimar on called Chizuk HaEmunah, and to my mind at least, it's a completely new way of looking, a completely new message from this dialogue, and that's the dialogue about Avram and Sarah, Hashem, Avram, Sarah, whether or not Sarah laughed, and how she laughed, and did she laugh, and she says, I didn't laugh. Chofetz Chaim tells us like this, just read the Pesukim, he says, read it, and you will be struck by the difficulties involved here. He says, it says like this, maybe it's a few, that's right, no, Posuk Yud Beis, actually, yeah. But Yitzchak, so a few Pesukim later, but Yitzchak Sarah b'kir b'leimash, Sarah laughed at herself, literally the fact that she was beyond the years of childbearing. After I have become older, is it possible that I could once again give birth? My master Avraham Avinu is elderly. Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, why is Sarah laughing? So what's going on here? Sarah seems to have an issue in terms of her emunah, believing that actually there will be that actually she will have children. Hashem brings her to task about this, right? And says to Avraham Avinu, why is Sarah laughing? Why is Sarah laughing? And Hashem says, Hashem reinforces the words of the Malach and says, the Malach has just informed you that you will have a son, and I'm now reinforcing that myself. Hashem says, I'm telling you, you're going to have a son. And then Sarah denies. I didn't laugh because I was afraid. And he says, no, look, you did laugh. I know for sure that you did laugh, and you didn't quite believe the Malach at all. And the Toras Chaim says, I don't understand. I find this incredibly difficult. Everything in the Torah is precious. Everything has kedusha, right? And there must be a reason, he says. Why does the Torah go to such length to tell us this story, to say what appears to be negative, something negative about Sarah, which she herself, as if she doesn't quite believe, right? Doesn't quite have that level of emunah. And she herself denies. And she says, I didn't laugh. What does that mean? She didn't laugh. Did she or didn't she? And that's what that's the Chofetz Chaim's problem. In fact, I think the problem actually of the Chofetz Chaim, I don't think he doesn't bring this, but I think it's actually reinforced by the Ramban in a way, because the Ramban says, it's worth seeing this Ramban briefly again on this point. The Ramban is on Tesvav. He says he asked the question, "Ani Tamor b'Neviah Hatzadekes." The great Neviah, Sarah Imenu, Eich Chachish, Ka'asha Omar Hashem Lanavi. How could you deny when Hashem said to the Navi, "V'gam lo melayemino divrei malachim malchei Elokim"? Why would she not believe? Malachim have appeared and given her this mission. How could she not believe? Avraham Avinu believes. Why doesn't she believe? V'hanira be'inai, says the Ramban, what you call a simple pshat. Ki hamalachim ho'ele hanirim ko anoshim bo'u el Avraham. These malachim who appeared like a man came to Avraham. Right? He realized that they were malachim. He realized they were angels. And he said, I'm going to come back. And he informed him, I'm going to come back and Sarah will have a son. The Sarah heard, she didn't realize. She just didn't realize they were malachim. As it says, like he brings the example, a similar parallel with Eshes Monach, the wife of Monach, story of the birth of Shimshon, right? Where his wife believes, the Malach says you're going to have a son, and that son will be called Shimshon. Monach doesn't believe it, and he wants the Malach to appear to him, right? Similar thing, he says. And then it says that, and then he carries on, says Sarah laughed, but it's Bakirba, she laughs. He makes a distinction, interestingly, between the word Sechok Pinu, which is simcha, like we say in Shir HaMalos, right? Then our mouths will be filled with laughter. That's laughter for simcha. But if it's titzchak b'kirba, schok inside the heart, internal laughing, that's not b'simcha. And therefore Hashem says, why was it that why did she not believe it? She should believe. Or she should at least say, Omein ken yaseh Hashem. You know, even if she didn't think they were malachim, they were angels, she should have at least said, Omein. Yeah, someone gives you a bracha to have a child at the age of, how old was she? 90 years old, right? She's Omein, so should be, so should Hashem should do. Now, it's a fascinating Ramban. The Manchester Rosh Yeshiva brings on this Ramban. He says that the astonishing thing in a way about the Ramban is, imagine someone comes along and says something, gives you a bracha, which is according to every measure of possibility and impossibility. Yeah, and yet she's called to task for not saying at least Amen. Yeah, let it be that way. Let's hope. Let's not give up. Let's have that emunah. That's the level of emunah that's required. That's what the implication of the Ramban is. But coming back to the Chofetz Chaim's problem, the difficulty is that if Sarah didn't think they were malachim, right? If Sarah didn't think they were malachim, so then why is she called to task over it? You know, this was an incredibly difficult thing to actually believe in. So what's going on? He says like this: Ma'aseh Avos Siman Abonim, says the Chofetz Chaim. Ma'aseh Avos Siman. Whatever happened to the Avos has a message for us. And he says, you know what the message is here with this episode? It's a message about the way we will behave, in all probability, when Mashiach comes. The time for Mashiach arrives, the Ikvsod Mashiach. Why? Because he says at that time, what's going to happen? They're going to be people, he says, there surely will be, at that time when Mashiach arrives, there will be great tzaddikim. There will be people who are like Nevi'im, like prophets amongst Klal Yisrael, and they will tell everyone, Mashiach's here. He's coming now. And you need to do tshuva. Everything is dependent on tshuva. And they will stir everyone up and they will encourage everyone, do tshuva, Mashiach's about to arrive. Says the Torah. You know what's going to happen at that time? There will be people who don't quite have that level of emunah. They won't quite believe that it could be possible. After all this time, we've gone through so much. Can it really be true? And they won't quite listen. And it will be like he says, because they had shortness of breath. It was too hard. It was too difficult for them. So the Torah says, in this episode, that Hashem will turn around and say, is it really true? Is there something that is beyond Hashem? Of course not. Of course not. Hashem can do anything. If Hashem says Mashiach is going to come today, then Mashiach will come today. So the Torah is telling us, says the Chavetz Chaim, in this vikuach, this debate, this machlokas, this argument between Avraham Avinu and Sarah and Hashem himself, that there will be many people, and in a way, it's almost like the Torah is telling us this is a natural way to behave, that they will bring answers and, if you like, say to themselves, and let me read you a few lines of what he says. That people will say, of course we know that Hashem can bring the redemption anytime. We say it in davening all the time. Mordechai Esther, we see Purim, one moment to the next, and we know all the Torahs, they'll say. We know, we've learned it all, right? We've learned it all. But everyone say, maybe it's not really now. It's not quite now. It might come a bit later. The Geula is not going to come today. Maybe it will come tomorrow. Maybe it will be a few years' time, but it's not going to be so quick. So Hashem will turn and say, no, it can happen now. It's going to happen right now, immediately. So this is what he says. The Torah is saying to us, when Sarah says that she didn't laugh, and she actually did believe, Hashem responds, Lo kitzochat, you did laugh. You did laugh. That you didn't quite believe. You had your questions even so. And even though her righteousness, he says, protected Sarah Imenu, but it's a message to us that sometimes there will come a time, he says, when Mashiach comes, where the temptation will be there to say, to laugh, oh, maybe, who says, this type of thing. And therefore the Torah brings this whole parsha to show to us, no, Hashem will say, you're telling me it's beyond me? Of course I can do it. And that's why you have this representation through Sarah herself. Sarah Imenu had these doubts. These doubts will apply to all of us. And we have to have the power and the courage and the faith to be able to say, no, it can, will happen, and actually believe it when it does. So that's the second idea I'd like to share with you on the idea of how I think these, as I say, the common theme here is the futuristic vision, the idea that we're taking these ideas and they're speaking to us. They speak to the future, in this case, literally to the future of the time of Mashiach. Finally, let me share with you an idea from Rabbeinu Yerucham in his Sefer Das Torah, and of course the great Mashgichim. His Sefer, the subtitle is Limudei, I think Musrei HaTorah, Masar HaTorah. Basically, the idea is to teach the key ethical points that come out from the Torah. And Rabbeinu Yerucham looks at the Parsha Sa'akedah, right at the end of the Parsha, and he says, like this. He says, and we look at the Parsha of the Akedah, Hashem, beginning of Perek Base. Hashem tested Avraham Avinu, and he says to him, Avraham, and he says Hineni. Now, the next pasuk, he says, what's the message? Please take espincha esichitcha. What does Rashi say? Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says, no. Just Rashi on the word no. Kach no, the first Rashi in pasuk base. Kach no, ein no el loshem bakosha. Please, request. Omalei said to him, bakosha mimcha. I request from you, amoid li b'zer nisoyim. Stand up, strong, in this test. Shelo yomru, so that people shouldn't say, horishonos lo hoya bahen mamash. People shouldn't say, yeah, he passed all those other tests, but they weren't real tests. They weren't quite, or maybe they were real tests, but they didn't quite test him enough. He wasn't quite there. He wasn't quite there in his emunah. So Rabbeinu Yerucham asked the obvious, straightforward question. He says, all of those things, let's think for a moment what Avraham Avinu had to undergo. They were incredibly difficult trials. Well, it was the famine. It was everything with Ishmael and everything else, and Sarah. All these things that Avraham Avinu had to undergo, right? Incredibly difficult tests. Ish Acher, he says, no one else would be able to stand up to all these things. So what would be if Avraham Avinu would fail test number 10? Because he fails the 10th. So everyone's going to turn around and say, those earlier ones, there was nothing. There wasn't really, there's no substance to them at all. If someone gets 9 out of 10 in the test, right? They fail the test. You didn't fail the test. You did very, very well. There was one level you couldn't get to, right? What's going on here? Why is it that everything depends on the Akedah? So he brings a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, famous Mishnah called Avo Hatluya B'Dovo. Any love, any relationship that is dependent on another factor, if that factor falls away, then the love itself falls away. If a love is dependent on something else, if A is dependent on B, then if B falls away, there's nothing to hold up A anymore, right? The primary thing. And he says like this: even with a relationship that is incredibly strong, he calls it, if at the end of the day it's dependent on something else, if that thing falls away, the love itself falls away. And he says the reality is that human beings are made up of a very, very complex system of one thing dependent on another. So much of what we do is basically, I'm doing this because of this, which is because of this, which is because, we're a complex web of emotions, of thoughts, of processes in what leads us to do whatever we do in life. That's how it is. That's what it is. Everything is dependent. He says, everyone has their conditions and their situations, right? There's loads in all we do. There's a talui bado. There's dependent on something else. And he brings a beautiful, beautiful mashal. He says like this. He says, they tell the story of someone, a young man, who has a mother-in-law who is particular, very, very, tells him off. At any occasion, he's obviously a newly married guy. And mother-in-law, really, she really kind of gives it to him if he does anything that doesn't appear to be 100% perfect. And she's watching over him all the time, and presumably he's looking forward to moving out this with his new wife. He's looking forward to moving out of the house. They're staying there for whatever reason. Anyway, so he's one day sitting in his room, this young man, and he hears footsteps outside, and he thinks, oh no, she's going to hear him, and she's going to think I'm messing around in the room, just lounging around. So what he starts doing is he starts learning to moshel. It's like he starts learning, and he starts davening really loudly so that she'll hear. Oh, what a son-in-law I've got! Look at him. No one can hear him, and he's still learning, and he's davening with such strength. Yeah, and then another time it happens, same thing, and he's in the middle of Kriya Shema, right? And he starts pronouncing the words really perfectly and really well, so she'll have every single word, right? Because maybe he thinks she'll hear me, and she thinks I'm going to say Shema properly, etc., etc. At the end of the day, this happens a number of times. Let's say he opens the door and he sees that every time padding up and down the corridor outside was a cat, right? That's all it was. It was a cat. It wasn't his feared mother-in-law after all. So he says, now what's happened to him? When he hears it's a cat, everything's fallen away. The Kriya Shema, all of the efforts he's put into his avoda, it's not there anymore. If at the end of the day, since his service of Hashem, since his avodas Hashem was dependent on this other factor, it was always in danger. Everything he did in terms of his approach to Torah and to Yiddishkeit, to Torah, it was always dependent, because it was dependent on this other factor. There was always a risk that if that factor was taken away, maybe he wouldn't remain so strong. Maybe he wouldn't be so particular. So what is the nimshal? He says everyone has, in the way they serve Hashem, factors that affect them, whether it's in terms of the fact that we like other people to think positively about us, whether it's because we're afraid of what others think of us. We're all like this. Or because maybe we feel forced to do something. These are the things that our service of Hashem are dependent upon. This is the Dova Hatola, he says. And in the event that a person does something with always, where it's always resting upon something else, it's always at risk of falling away. So what is going on here, he says, is that with all of the earlier tests of Avraham Avinu, absolutely, they were Nisyonos Gedolim, he says. They were great tests. They were serious tests. They tested him in multiple ways. And no one else could have done it apart from Avraham. But this Nisoyon, this one, the one where he's told to take his only son, right, and to shech that son on the Mizbeach, in this case, if he would have held back and not achieved it, this would have demonstrated that everything else he did was still dependent on something else. There was something there that the relationship with Hashem wasn't 100%. There was something missing. There was something missing. It was still dependent on something. And had that factor been removed, then it could be indeed that his whole avodas Hashem could have fallen away. We're talking about incredibly high madregas here, right? Levels of, we can't even begin to imagine. But the lesson is that the demonstration of the Akedah is what he calls Yiras Elokim Tahora. We describe Yiras Elokim Tahora, the Pasuk describes it, Yiras Hashem Tahora, Omedes Lo'at. It stands forever. It can stand up in any test, true and pure Yiras Hashem. When Avraham Avinu is able to withstand this last test, and he's able to demonstrate that he can even give up his only son for Hashem, that is the moment when Hashem says, Ato Yodati. Now I know. What does it say? Ki yirei Elokim ata. Now I know that you fear Hashem. Because now I know that the only possible motivator, the only possible motivating factor for you being able to complete all of those tests that I've put in your path is because you fear Hashem. It cannot possibly be for any other reason. Because if you can go so far as to be ready to even give up on the Mizbeach, right, your only son, there can be no greater demonstration that you are a true Yirei Elokim, that you really fear Hashem. And that is how Avraham Avinu indeed is able to merit all of the brachas. He's able to pass that final test. And that final test demonstrates through the fact that he is the ultimate Yirei Elokim, the demonstration of that Mishnah, that itself demonstrates and proves and goes with this idea from that Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that the ahava that he has for Hashem is not told on anything else, doesn't depend on anything else. And that helps us understand why it is that this Rashi, right, the idea that Hashem says, no, please, right, kach no es bincha, please take your son, please do this. Why? Because otherwise people will say, you've done very well, but it was always something there was always something you did it maybe for another reason. It was dependent on something else. This showed the purity of Avraham Avinu's motives and intentions, something which we benefit from, of course, in every way. To this day, the idea of Ma'aseh Avos Siman Avonim, it's Avraham Avinu's example that we live by every day. Thank you all. Have a very good Shabbos. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.
Good Shabbos.
Have a safe trip.
Good Shabbos. Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Pleasure. Good evening. Good Shabbos.